It's roughly 25000 years ago. You're crouching near a fire somewhere, in what will eventually become southern France, and your hair is everywhere. It's matted into the back of your neck. It's hanging over your eyes. There's something dried in it that you'd rather not think about too hard. And at some point, maybe today, maybe yesterday, maybe 100 generations before you were born, someone in your bloodline picked up something sharp. A flint edge, a shell, a piece of obsidian so thin, it catches the light like a mirror. And they did something that on the surface makes no immediate survival sense. They started cutting. Not because a doctor told them to, not because a barber existed, not because a magazine told them that effortless layers are in this season. Just because. Or maybe not just because. Maybe because of something much older and stranger than fashion. Something baked into the wiring of a species that was already at that point doing all kinds of things that had no obvious evolutionary justification. Building jewelry, painting caves, burying their dead with flowers. So here's the question. Why did we start cutting our hair? The short answer is, we don't entirely know. The long answer is, what this video is about. And it's stranger, more layered, and honestly a little more embarrassing than you'd expect. Let's start with the thing everyone says first. Practicality. Hair gets in your eyes. Hair traps parasites. Hair in a hot climate is basically a wool coat you can't take off. So, the argument goes, early humans started cutting their hair because it made practical sense. Cooler head, clearer vision, fewer lice. Simple as that. Case closed. Go home. Except, and here's where this gets interesting, the fossil record and genetic evidence suggests that our ancestors actually evolved to have less body hair over hundreds of thousands of years. The timeline matters here. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, arrived on the scene around 3,000,000 years ago. By that point, we'd already shed most of our body hair compared to our primate relatives. Our heads, though, kept theirs. And not just kept it in most human populations. Head hair grows continuously, indefinitely, in a way that almost no other mammal's fur does. Left completely alone, a human's hair doesn't stop at a natural length the way a dog's coat does. It just keeps going. That is biologically unusual. That is a design choice in the evolutionary sense. So here's the question, wrapped inside the question. If head hair was such a survival liability, why did evolution keep it? Why didn't we just lose it, the same way we lost most of our body? Fur. One is thermoregulation. Head hair actually protects the brain from direct solar radiation, which matters a lot if you're an animal that does most of its hunting at midday in open savanna. Another is that long head hair may have had sexual selection value, a signal of health age parasite load, long before anyone decided to cut it. But here's the thing. Those answers don't explain why at some point some human looked at that hair and decided to change it deliberately. Practical trimming, for function, sure. But humans went way beyond function, and they did it very, very early. The oldest direct evidence of hair cutting and styling comes not from hair itself. Organic material almost never survives tens of thousands of years, but from something much more durable. Bone needles carved, figurines, and ochre pigment. Patterns. Around 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, in multiple sites across Europe and Asia, archaeologists find small figurines, often called Venus figurines, that show human figures with distinctly styled hair. Not wild, not unkempt, but braided, patterned, swept back, held in place with what appear to be carved bone pins. 40,000 years ago, someone was not just cutting their hair. They were styling it with tools they had specifically crafted for the purpose. The oldest known combs date to around 5,000 to 8,000 years ago in places like ancient Egypt and the Near East, made from bone, ivory, and wood. You don't carve a comb unless grooming hair is already a deeply established practice. You don't spontaneously invent hair technology. You refine it. In 2020, researchers analyzing ancient human remains from a site in Morocco, dated to roughly 1,4,000 years ago, found clear evidence of deliberate tooth modification and body decoration, alongside tools that showed wear, patterns consistent with working organic fibrous material. The picture that emerges across all of this evidence is not one of occasional accidental trimming. It's one of a species that was deeply, consistently, intentionally messing with its own hair from very early in its history. In almost every human culture ever studied, hair functions as a social signal, not just aesthetically, symbolically. Hair tells people who you are, what group you belong to, what stage of life you're in, whether you're available for mating, whether you're in mourning, whether you're a priest or a warrior, or a widow, or a child about to become an adult. The anthropologist Charles Berg made the provocative argument that cutting hair has always functioned as a ritual act of social identity change. You don't just trim your hair, you signal a transition. You say, I am different now from what I was before. The first haircut given to a child as a rite of passage in Hindu tradition, in Jewish tradition, in dozens of indigenous American traditions. The shaving of heads at military induction, the shearing that accompanies religious vows in Buddhist and Christian monastic orders alike, the cutting of hair in grief rituals across Polynesia, Africa, parts of the ancient Near East. Julius Caesar reportedly wept when he learned that Cleopatra had cut her hair during mourning. The detail stuck because it meant something visceral and immediate to anyone in that world. Hair, it turns out, is not just hair. Hair is a kind of biological text that humans have been writing on each other for at least 40,000 years, probably much longer. There is a strong and increasingly well-supported argument that one of the most significant practical drivers of early hair management was not vanity, not ritual, not social signaling, it was lice. Human head lice, Pediculus, Humanus capitis, are fascinating and slightly horrifying little creatures. They have been with us for a very long time. Genetic analysis of human louse populations, published in the early 2000s by researchers at the University of Florida, suggested that human head lice and body lice diverged as distinct populations somewhere between 7,2,0,0,0 and 1,7,0,0,0,0 years ago. And the reason that divergence happened when it did is almost certainly clothing. Body lice need clothing seams to lay their eggs, so they couldn't have existed as a separate population before we started wearing clothes consistently. Head lice, the older lineage, have been on us the entire time. Through every stage of human development, in every climate, on every continent, they are in the most uncomfortably intimate sense our oldest companions. Chronic lice infestation causes sleep disruption. From itching leads to secondary bacterial infections. From scratching, and in dense social groups, they spread with devastating efficiency through close contact. A population of early humans living in a rock shelter or sharing sleeping hides is basically a perfect lice transmission environment. So you have a species with continuously growing hair living in close quarters with a persistent parasite problem. And then someone realizes that shorter hair on the scalp makes lice management dramatically easier. There's a reason military organizations across history shaved heads when dealing with large groups of people in close quarters. It works. The itch that changed history. That is not a metaphor. That might literally be true. Even if lice were the trigger, humans were not going to stay at functional parasite management for long. We are not that restrained a species. Because here's what happens when you introduce any form of deliberate body modification into a social species with a large neocortex and a powerful drive for status signaling. It immediately becomes competitive. It becomes art. It becomes politics. Researchers consistently find that hair condition is one of the most universally attended to physical features when humans assess a potential mate. Not just length, condition, shine, thickness. The biological signal that this hair is encoding is health, nutritional status, hormonal health, and parasite load. Healthy hair is expensive to produce. It requires protein. It requires micronutrients. An individual who can grow long, thick, shiny hair is advertising that they have surplus resources to spend on biological luxury. From an evolutionary standpoint, that's a very attractive advertisement. Once early humans discovered that cutting, braiding, oiling, pinning, and decorating hair could enhance the appearance of the health signal, could make the advertisement louder. You have ignited an arms race that has been running for somewhere between 30,000 and 100,000 years. Every innovation in hair management is at some level an attempt to say, look at this. Look how healthy I am. Look how much time I had to spend on this. Look how much someone cared enough to do this to me. Being groomed by someone is a social signal in itself. It means you are not alone. You have allies. You are embedded in a network of care. The barbershop, in its deepest evolutionary meaning, is a proof of friendship. Somewhere in the long history of human hair cutting, the practice stopped being purely about the hair and became about the self, about who you are choosing to be. Studies on body image and identity consistently show that humans treat hair as a uniquely intimate extension of personal identity in a way that distinguishes it from almost every other body part. Losing hair to illness or age is experienced as an identity disruption, not just a cosmetic inconvenience. Choosing to change hair dramatically is experienced as a form of self-reinvention. There's a reason the breakup haircut is a cliché. It's a cliché because it works. It externalizes an internal shift. It says to the mirror and to the world, something has changed. Because the same species that started decorating their bodies with ochre 30,000 years ago, that started burying their dead with ritual intention around 10,000 years ago, that started carving figurines and playing bone flutes 4,000 years ago. That species was capable of symbolic self-expression at a level we're still only beginning to appreciate. When the first human looked at their own reflection in still water and then reached for a sharp edge and cut something away that was not just grooming, that was narrative. That was a story someone was telling about themselves. We are the animal that edits itself. Our closest primate relatives, chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, spend an enormous percentage of their social time grooming each other. Grooming is their primary social bonding technology. It releases oxytocin. It builds trust. It establishes and reinforces social hierarchies, alliances, and affections. Humans, as our social groups got larger, and we could no longer physically groom every member of our community, shifted much of that bonding load onto language. Conversation, Robin Dunbar famously argued, is basically grooming at a distance. We still cut each other's hair. We still brush and braid and wash and style each other. And the neurochemistry of that experience is, researchers believe, not entirely different from what a chimpanzee feels when their ally works through their fur on a warm afternoon. Your ancestors sat around a fire tens of thousands of years ago, and they picked things out of each other's hair. And in doing so, they built the social fabric that kept a fragile, slow, not particularly fanged primate alive long enough to eventually slowly become you. The haircut is ancient. The connection it carries is even older. So why did humans start cutting their hair? Probably because of lice at first, then because it felt good to be touched and cared for, then because it turned out to be a powerful social signal, then because it became a way of marking change, loss, transformation, belonging, then because it became art, then because it became fashion, commerce, politics, identity, then all of those things simultaneously layered on top of each other like sediment. You came from a long line of creatures who groomed each other obsessively, who told stories about themselves with their bodies, who understood that changing your appearance is a way of changing your story. That instinct is not shallow. It is not vain. It is as old and as serious as language and as fire. We cut our hair because we are human, and being human has always meant, among other things, that we pay attention to each other, that we signal, that we care. So, here's the question I'll leave with you. If you could go back, if you could sit down next to that person, crouching by the fire in southern France, 25,000 years ago, sharp flint in hand, what do you think they were? Impressing. Were they solving a problem? Impressing someone? Grieving something? Or were they just for one moment deciding who they wanted to be? Leave your answer below. I read every single one.